Number 1. Harjinder Singh. A single illegal U-turn on the Florida Turnpike turned a routine drive into a headline that would ripple from a small Punjabi village to the corridors of American politics. Harjinder Singh grew up far from American highways, a young man who left home seeking work and a chance at a better life. He arrived in the United States years ago and found work driving long-haul trucks, building a quiet life on the road between stops, miles of asphalt, and a routine of delivery schedules. Friends and relatives describe him as steady and hard-working, the sort of man whose mistakes, they say, were never meant to be life-ending. On August 12, 2025, investigators say Singh made an illegal U-turn on a stretch of the Florida Turnpike, where such maneuvers are prohibited. A minivan struck the trailer and 3 people died at the scene. The collision was swift and brutal, turning a momentary decision into a tragedy that left families grieving and authorities scrambling for answers. Singh was arrested and later returned to Florida to face state charges. As the case unfolded, federal investigators administered assessments that would become central to the public debate. Officials say Singh answered only 2 of 12 English verbal questions correctly and identified just 1 of 4 road signs during testing tied to licensing requirements. That detail, whether it was a language barrier, poor training, or something else, fed a larger argument about how commercial licenses are issued and monitored. The legal aftermath was swift and polarizing. Local prosecutors charged Singh with multiple counts of vehicular homicide. Courts denied bond on the state counts as the investigation continued, and federal immigration authorities added their own enforcement actions. The driver's employer and the process by which he obtained commercial credentials came under scrutiny, as officials and lawmakers probed whether systemic failures helped set the stage for the crash. Public reaction split along emotional and political lines. A Change.org petition calling for leniency quickly attracted millions of signatures from supporters who insist the crash was a tragic mistake and argue for mercy. Others saw that wave of support as evidence of misinformation and rallied for accountability instead. The headlines reflected both grief for the victims and a fierce debate over safety, immigration policy, and whether one mistake should define a lifetime. And today the case sits at the intersection of human tragedy and system failures, grieving families seeking justice, a defendant whose life has been altered forever, and a nation asking how similar tragedies might be prevented. The courtroom will eventually determine guilt and punishment. Until then, the turn that changed everything remains a single, stark fact. 3 lives lost, and a small village and a vast country left to reckon with the cost. Number 2. Robert Ben Rhodes. He was a lone long-haul trucker whose tidy cab hid a mobile nightmare, a man who turned the interstate into a hunting ground. Robert Ben Rhodes grew up in the American heartland and learned early to live on the road. By all outward signs, he was a trucker like any other, hauling freight across state lines and slipping into truck stops between runs. But behind the curtain of the sleeper cab, investigators later discovered, he had converted his rig into a terrifying private chamber where he kept victims captive and tortured them. That chilling makeover of a commonplace vehicle is what earned him the chilling nickname, the Truck Stop Killer. His crimes, as pieced together by law enforcement and survivors, were methodical and predatory. Rhodes targeted vulnerable people, often hitchhikers or sex workers who crossed paths with a friendly-seeming driver, luring them into his truck with promises of a ride or work. Once inside, some victims were reportedly bound, drugged, or otherwise restrained inside a compartment he had rigged for that purpose. Accounts from survivors and later confessions describe tools and devices in the cab that transformed it from a vehicle into a mobile torture space, a fact that horrified the investigators who later examined the rig. Police began to link disappearances and dead bodies to Rhodes after patterns emerged. Victims with similar profiles, dump sites near highways he frequented, and eyewitness reports placing a particular tractor trailer in the area. In April 1990, officers arrested Rhodes. Subsequent investigations uncovered physical evidence in his truck and led to charges that would eventually end his freedom. He was convicted in Illinois for the murder of Regina K. Walters and later faced other prosecutions and pleas related to victims found across the South and Midwest. The scope of Rhodes's crimes remains a matter of grim estimation. Official convictions number in the single digits, but investigators and researchers have long suspected his involvement in many more disappearances and murders from the 1970s through 1990. Some estimates place the possible victim count far higher, a reflection of how a transient profession and cross-jurisdictional crimes can mask a pattern for years. That uncertainty confirmed victims versus suspected ones is part of what made his case both terrifying and notoriously difficult to fully untangle. Survivors' accounts and journalistic investigations later painted a picture of a man who could appear ordinary and helpful, then reveal a calculating cruelty once alone with a stranger. Reporters and authors who studied his case described not only the physical evidence found in his cab, but also the stories of narrow escapes from people who recognized danger in time testimonies that helped build a broader case against him, and that have haunted readers and investigators ever since. Rhodes was sentenced to life behind bars and remains imprisoned, a man whose mobility was his cover and whose truck became a weapon. The legal record shows convictions and pleas for several murders, but the true number of his victims may never be fully known, a gap that stands as a grim reminder of how predators exploited the freedom of the open road and the vulnerability of people on its margins. His case prompted law enforcement to examine how crimes that cross states can be connected, and it left a legacy of tighter cooperation between agencies hunting highway predators. Number 3. Randy Kraft. He called himself the Scorecard Killer, a trucker whose route across California and the West hit a decades-long trail of murder. Randy Stephen Kraft was raised in Southern California and by all outward appearances fit the life of a long-haul trucker. Solitary, always on the move, and hard to pin down. Friends remembered a polite, unassuming man with a steady job, but the discovery of his crimes revealed a predatory pattern beneath his ordinary exterior, preying on young men who disappeared along desolate stretches of highway. Through the 1970s and early 1980s, bodies turned up in California and neighboring states, young males often found in rural areas or dumped along remote roads. For years, investigators struggled to link cases. Victims were spread across jurisdictions, sometimes unclothed and showing signs of trauma, and few witnesses came forward. The transient nature of trucker routes made it easier for a killer like Kraft to operate. His long hours behind the wheel and knowledge of secluded spots provided both opportunity and cover. Kraft's method was chilling in its consistency. He targeted young men, often hitchhikers or travelers, and used charm or the promise of a ride to bring them into his truck. Evidence and later confessions suggested he drugged some victims and bound others. He kept meticulous records of encounters, a habit that would later become central to prosecutors' cases. Those not killed outright were sometimes left alive, terrified and scarred. Others were not found until weeks or months later, their deaths only detected when hunters, hikers, or passerby stumbled on remains. investigators finally focused on Kraft after forensic links and witness reports placed him near multiple victims. In 1983, police arrested him after matching physical evidence and items traced to his possession with those found near bodies. The discovery of notebooks and a so-called scorecard detailing names, dates, and locations became notorious in the trial. A record prosecutors argued documented his crimes and the tally of his victims. That paper trail, together with physical evidence, formed the backbone of the case that would send him to prison. Kraft's trials revealed a chilling portrait, a man whose outward normalcy masked violent urges and a calculated approach to selecting and disposing of victims. Prosecutors argued that the pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Defense attorneys contested interpretations and raised questions about forensic certainty. But juries in California convicted Kraft of multiple murders. He received consecutive life sentences and was ordered to spend the rest of his life behind bars. The true scale of Kraft's crimes remains the subject of grim speculation. Officially convicted for a set number of murders, investigators and cold case teams have suspected him in many more disappearances that matched his modus operandi. The interstate and cross-jurisdictional nature of his suspected crimes made full accounting difficult. Some families waited years for closure, while others never learned the fate of missing loved ones. Kraft's case forced law enforcement to rethink how to connect crimes spread across state lines and underscored the importance of shared databases, DNA testing, and communication between agencies. His conviction provided answers for some families, but also left lingering questions about victims who may never be identified. In prison, Kraft lived out his days a convicted killer, his mobility replaced by bars and routine, while the echoes of his victims' lives continued to demand remembrance and justice. Number 4. Bruce Mendenhall. A trucker's routine route hid a darker pattern bodies left near highways, a quiet life on the road that would later unravel into one of the most chilling multi-state manhunts for a suspected serial killer. Bruce Mendenhall spent years behind the wheel of a semi, a job that put him on long stretches of interstate and in contact with towns from one state line to the next. Neighbors and acquaintances described him as a steady worker who kept to himself, the kind of man who blended into truck stop culture. Quick coffee, engine checks, and a calendar of delivery schedules. That ordinariness would later be the mask that helped him move between jurisdictions as investigators tried to piece together a pattern of death. Over time, a pattern emerged around sites frequented by long-haul drivers. Women, many of them vulnerable, and living at society's margins, were found dead or missing near truck stops and highway pull-offs. Local police in different states began to notice similarities in how these victims were found, and detectives facing the challenge of crimes that crossed county and state boundaries slowly started to connect dots that had once seemed isolated. The mobility of the suspect, a trucker with knowledge of remote sites and routes, became a haunting common thread. When investigators finally focused on Mendenhall, it was the convergence of forensic evidence, witness accounts, and the cross-referencing of locations tied to his roots that built a case investigators could not ignore. Searches of his truck and property yielded items that linked him to multiple scenes. Digital records, gas receipts, and cell phone data helped place him near where victims had last been seen. Those fragments of proof, when combined, painted a picture of opportunity and presence that prosecutors would use to charge him in a string of killings. Trials revealed the human toll behind the statistics. Families desperate for answers, victims who had been pushed to life on the edges, and the slow pursuit of justice across state lines. Prosecutors argued that Mendenhall used the freedoms of the interstate to seek out victims and dispose of evidence in places where discovery could be delayed. Defense attorneys pushed back, contesting the strength and interpretation of forensic links, and reminding juries that circumstantial evidence must meet a high standard. In several jurisdictions, the courts returned convictions for murder and long sentences that would keep Mendenhall behind bars for life. The case also exposed how the modern highways can enable predators and how law enforcement must overcome jurisdictional boundaries to protect the most vulnerable. Coordinated investigations, data sharing between agencies, and renewed attention to cold cases were among the institutional responses that emerged from the Mendenhall files. For families who had waited years, those efforts brought a measure of closure. For investigators, they underscored the importance of persistence in cases where geography itself is part of the criminal's toolbox. Beyond courtrooms and forensic reports, the story left communities asking difficult questions about who is overlooked and why some victims become targets. Journalists and advocates highlighted patterns of marginalization. Survivors and family members who felt their loved ones' lives were undervalued and pushed for reforms in how missing person reports and sex worker deaths are investigated. The ripple effects of the Mendenhall case reached beyond one man's conviction. They sparked conversations about safety, compassion, and the systems that fail to catch predators until tragedy forces attention. Today, Bruce Mendenhall remains incarcerated, a driver whose mobility became his cover and whose crimes forced a reckoning across state lines. Families remember the victims by name, and law enforcement continues to sift through cold leads with renewed urgency, hoping to account for every life taken. Number 5. Keith Hunter Jesperson. He was a long-haul truck driver known as the Happy Face Killer, and his name still echoes in the darkest corners of true crime history. What made Keith Hunter Jesperson stand out wasn't just his crimes, but the chilling way he taunted authorities with letters signed with a smiley face. His path to becoming one of America's most terrifying killers began on the open highways, where endless miles offered both opportunity and cover for his evil deeds. Keith was born in 1955 in British Columbia, Canada, and grew up in a strict, often abusive household. From an early age, he displayed troubling tendencies, hurting animals and showing a fascination with violence. These warning signs went largely unnoticed as he grew into adulthood. He later found work as a truck driver in the U.S., a profession that gave him something deadly: access to victims and the ability to move quickly across state lines without leaving an easy trail. Jesperson's killing spree began in the early 1990s, targeting vulnerable women, often sex workers, whom he would pick up during his long hauls. His first known victim was a woman named Tanya Bennett in 1990. He strangled her after an argument, then dumped her body in a remote area. What's even more disturbing is what followed. 2 people falsely confessed to Tanya's murder, and Jesperson, angry that others were taking credit for his crime, began writing letters to the media and police, confessing in detail. Each letter was signed with a smiley face, giving him his infamous nickname. His crimes didn't stop there. Over the next 5 years, Jesperson admitted to killing at least 8 women across multiple states, though he claimed the number was higher. His victims were often picked up at truck stops or along highways, women he believed no one would miss. The brutality of his acts and his ability to operate unnoticed made him a phantom predator, blending into the ordinary world of cross-country trucking. Jesperson's arrest in 1995 came after he wrote a confession to his brother and ex-girlfriend, revealing his dark secret. They turned the letters over to authorities, ending his reign of terror. During interrogations, Jesperson showed little remorse, casually discussing his killings as if they were routine stops on his routes. He is currently serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. What makes his story truly haunting isn't just the murders. It's the cold, calculated way he operated under the guise of an everyday job. A man behind the wheel of a big rig, smiling on the outside, hiding a monstrous darkness within. Jesperson's name remains a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators hide in plain sight, cruising down the highways we travel every day. Number 6. Delmas Colvin. He drove America's highways by night, but behind the wheel, Delmas Colvin was hiding something far darker than any midnight road. Known as the truck stop killer, Colvin used his long-haul trucker job as the perfect cover for a series of brutal murders that spanned decades. Delmas Colvin was born in Toledo, Ohio, in 1959. His early life didn't scream serial killer. He came from a working-class family and lived a seemingly normal childhood. But Colvin later claimed his first murder happened when he was just a teenager, setting him on a path of violence that would continue for more than 30 years. After serving in the military and getting married, he eventually found work as a truck driver. That job gave him the perfect freedom and anonymity to kill without drawing suspicion. Colvin's choice of victims was deliberate. He targeted vulnerable women, often sex workers, who were less likely to be reported missing right away. Using his semi-truck as both a lure and a crime scene, he picked up women at truck stops, promising them money or a ride. Once inside his cab, the victims were at his mercy. Colvin would strangle them to death, then dispose of their bodies along remote highways, in wooded areas, or near truck stops. For years, these killings went unnoticed because they occurred in multiple states, making it nearly impossible for law enforcement to connect the dots. What's chilling is how organized he was. Colvin admitted to carrying kill kits in his truck, which included items like rope and tape. He cleaned up after himself, left little evidence, and kept moving. Detectives later learned that his crimes stretched across at least 7 states, and he confessed to killing more than 50 women. Some experts believe the actual number could be even higher. He kept details of his murders in his memory like trophies, never forgetting the faces of the women he strangled. For decades, he lived a double life. To his family and friends, he was a quiet, hard-working trucker. Nobody suspected the monster lurking behind the wheel. But his downfall came in 2004, when DNA evidence linked him to the murder of a woman found in Ohio. Investigators dug deeper and uncovered a horrifying trail of killings going back decades. Colvin eventually confessed, casually describing murders as if they were part of a routine. When asked why he did it, his answer was chillingly cold. I had an urge. There was no grand motive, no revenge, just a dark compulsion he couldn't resist. His confessions painted a picture of a predator who saw the open road not as freedom, but as an endless hunting ground. Today, Delmas Colvin is serving multiple life sentences with no chance of parole. But the true number of his victims may never be fully known. For years, he turned America's highways into his killing fields, leaving behind questions that may never be answered, and lives that can never be replaced. Number 7. Adam Leroy Lane. Adam Leroy Lane was known as the Highway Killer, a predator who turned America's interstates into his personal hunting ground. By day, he worked as a long-haul truck driver, moving cargo across states. By night, he stalked suburban neighborhoods, breaking into homes and attacking women in the dead of night. His crimes were chilling not only because of their brutality, but also because of how random they were, making every house along his route a potential target. Lane's method was disturbingly calculated. He used his job to travel unnoticed, pulling his rig over in quiet neighborhoods under the cover of darkness. Armed with a knife, he would approach homes that seemed vulnerable. Doors left unlocked, windows open. Once inside, he attacked women as they slept, leaving a trail of terror behind him. Authorities believe he killed at least 2 women, but the true number could be far higher. Many of his suspected crimes remain unsolved because of his nomadic lifestyle and ability to blend into the anonymous world of truckers. One of his known murders was Carolyn Carey White, a 38-year-old woman from Pennsylvania. Lane broke into her home, stabbed her multiple times, and vanished into the night. Another confirmed victim was Leticia Letty Gonzalez, whom he attacked in a similarly brutal fashion. Lane's preference for isolated, quiet communities made his crimes especially terrifying. People felt safe in their own beds, but he shattered that illusion. His downfall came by sheer luck. In 2007, while prowling a home in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, he was confronted by a family who fought back. The father wrestled Lane to the ground, managing to restrain him until police arrived. This act of bravery stopped what could have been another murder. When investigators searched his truck, they found chilling evidence: hunting knives, duct tape, and DVDs on serial killers. These discoveries proved his attacks were not impulsive, but part of a deeply disturbing obsession with violence. Lane eventually confessed to several attacks and was sentenced to life in prison. His case sparked widespread fear and led to changes in how law enforcement tracks crimes committed by transient workers like truck drivers. For many, Lane became the embodiment of the hidden dangers lurking along America's highways, proof that evil can be constantly moving, always hunting for its next victim. Number 8. Clark Perry Baldwin. Clark Perry Baldwin was a name that barely made headlines for decades. A former long-haul truck driver, he lived a life that appeared ordinary on the surface. Married, raising a daughter, and working steady jobs, Baldwin's existence seemed routine. But behind this mask of normalcy lay one of America's most sinister secrets, hidden for nearly 3 decades. His life and crimes would eventually shock the nation, proving that evil can hide in plain sight, cruising along the highways we all share. Born in Iowa in 1962, Baldwin grew up in an unremarkable small-town environment. Neighbors remembered him as quiet, sometimes brooding, but never someone who drew attention. After graduating high school, Baldwin entered the trucking industry, a profession that offered him solitude and endless miles of American roads. For a man with dark impulses, the trucking lifestyle provided the perfect cover. Constant travel, remote highways, and frequent stops in isolated areas created a chilling hunting ground. Women who crossed paths with Baldwin often had no idea they were about to meet their worst nightmare. The pattern of his crimes would reveal itself slowly and horrifyingly. Between 1991 and 1992, Baldwin is believed to have killed at least 3 women. These were not simple murders. They were acts of pure brutality. Investigators later discovered that Baldwin's victims were often pregnant, adding a disturbing layer to his already shocking crimes. One of the first confirmed murders occurred in Wyoming, where the body of a young woman named Robin Pelkey was found. She had been strangled, her body left in a remote location off the interstate. This method would become Baldwin's chilling signature: binding, strangulation, and disposal in desolate areas where discovery could take years. What made Baldwin particularly dangerous was his ability to blend into everyday life. After committing these horrific acts, he would return to his family, share meals, and act as though nothing had happened. This dual existence allowed him to evade capture for decades. The transient nature of trucking worked in his favor, scattering evidence across multiple states and jurisdictions. Back then, communication between law enforcement agencies was limited, and DNA technology was still in its infancy. Baldwin knew this and exploited every gap in the system. By the late 1990s, Baldwin's life took a quieter turn. He remarried and seemed to settle into a domestic rhythm, leaving many to believe his violent streak had ended. But evil doesn't disappear. It waits. For years, Baldwin lived under the radar, his past buried with his victims in shallow graves along forgotten highways. It wasn't until 2019 that the truth finally caught up with him. Advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to connect Baldwin to multiple cold cases spanning different states, including Wyoming and Tennessee. The genetic evidence was irrefutable. Baldwin was arrested at his home in Iowa, decades after his killing spree began. When confronted, Baldwin showed little remorse. The details that emerged during the investigation painted a picture of a man driven by sadistic urges, targeting vulnerable women in the most opportunistic way possible. The revelation that at least 2 of his victims were pregnant horrified even seasoned detectives, highlighting the depth of his depravity. Baldwin's arrest reopened wounds for families who had waited decades for answers, finally providing closure, albeit with unimaginable pain. Today, Baldwin sits behind bars, awaiting the justice that eluded him for so long. His case serves as a grim reminder of the hidden dangers lurking on America's highways. Long-haul trucking, with its culture of isolation and movement, has become synonymous with some of the most chilling serial murder cases in the country. Baldwin was not the first, nor would he be the last, to exploit this dark opportunity. The story of Clark Perry Baldwin is a terrifying example of how an ordinary facade can mask monstrous behavior. For nearly 30 years, he drove across states with a smile for his neighbors and murder in his heart. And while technology eventually exposed him, one question still haunts investigators and families alike. Were there more victims out there, lying in forgotten fields, waiting for someone to speak their truth? Number 9. John Robert Williams. He was the man behind the wheel, driving through the night like any other trucker. But hidden beneath that calm exterior was a predator who turned America's highways into hunting grounds. John Robert Williams wasn't just an ordinary long-haul trucker. His life on the road gave him a cover few could suspect. He used the endless highways as his stage, traveling from state to state, where no one could track him. The cab of his truck wasn't just for rest. It was where some of the darkest crimes happened. His targets were almost always vulnerable women. Many were sex workers, hitchhikers, or women down on their luck, trying to make it from one place to another. Williams offered them a ride, but once they stepped into his truck, their fate was sealed. His method was chillingly calculated. He would lure them in with promises of money, food, or safety. And once the door closed, they were trapped in a rolling prison. What made him especially dangerous was his ability to blend in. Other truckers saw him as quiet, a man who kept to himself. Law enforcement barely noticed him for years, and that's exactly what he wanted. Because behind the scenes, he was disposing of bodies in some of the most remote stretches of highway, where no one would think to look. His crimes stretched across multiple states, making him nearly impossible to track. Victims disappeared without a trace, their families left searching for answers that never came. Williams counted on this chaos. He knew the system struggled to connect murders across state lines. It gave him time, years of freedom to keep killing. When investigators finally closed in, the truth was worse than anyone imagined. They tied him to multiple murders, each one more brutal than the last. Women were strangled, beaten, and dumped like trash along desolate roads. And for every confirmed victim, there were whispers of more. How many? No one knows. Some believe he could have taken the lives of dozens. Even after his arrest, Williams showed no remorse. He sat in court, calm, almost bored, as prosecutors laid out the horrors he committed. For him, these women were nothing more than opportunities. That coldness, that complete lack of empathy, is what made him one of America's most terrifying trucker killers. John Robert Williams reminds us that evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the quiet guy in the next lane, driving a big rig through the night. The highways he once roamed freely still carry the shadows of his crimes, a chilling reminder of how a predator can hide in plain sight. Number 10. Robert Gene Rembert, Jr. He was the man who turned routine truck routes into hunting grounds. From the outside, Robert Gene Rembert, Jr. appeared like any other long-haul trucker, moving goods across states. But behind that wheel lurked a predator whose violent appetite would claim multiple lives. Robert Gene Rembert was born in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1969, and his early life gave little hint of the darkness to come. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood, lived a relatively quiet existence, and stayed out of serious trouble in his youth. Those who knew him described him as reserved, polite even, a man who didn't draw attention. That calm exterior, however, concealed a disturbing reality that would eventually earn him the title of one of America's most dangerous trucker killers. The first murder tied to Rembert dates back to 1997, when the body of Kimberly Hall, a 27-year-old mother, was found strangled in her Cleveland home. At that time, the case went cold due to a lack of evidence. Authorities had no idea that this was the beginning of a killing spree that would stretch nearly 2 decades. After Hall's death, Rembert faded into the background and lived an ordinary life, working different jobs before finally becoming a truck driver, a profession that gave him freedom, mobility, and anonymity, perfect for a predator who needed to hide his crimes. His second confirmed killing came in 2015, a shocking 18 years after the first. That year, police discovered the body of Rena Payton, a 47-year-old woman, inside her apartment in Cleveland. She had been strangled to death. This time, investigators quickly identified Rembert as a suspect because he was last seen with her. When police arrested him a few days later, they had no idea the magnitude of what they were about to uncover. Once in custody, DNA testing linked Rembert to 2 other murders: the 1997 killing of Kimberly Hall and the 2015 murder of 31-year-old Diane Madison, a woman who had been beaten and strangled inside her home. Both crimes had remained unsolved for years, buried in the cold case files. But now, everything pointed to Rembert as the common thread. When questioned, Rembert admitted to more than investigators initially suspected. He confessed that his truck driving job had given him opportunities to pick up sex workers and strangers at truck stops, rest areas, and city streets. His confessions connected him to killings in multiple states, and authorities believe his true victim count could be much higher than what's confirmed. He described killing as something that came over him uncontrollably, an urge he couldn't resist once he felt it. In 2016, Robert Gene Rembert, Jr. pleaded guilty to multiple murders and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Even behind bars, he never showed much remorse, and his interviews suggested he had fully accepted his identity as a killer. For law enforcement, his case became another haunting reminder of how easily truckers with bad intentions can exploit the open roads to commit horrific crimes undetected for years. Today, Rembert sits in prison, a chilling example of a predator who hid in plain sight. For nearly 20 years, he navigated highways while carrying the weight of his victims' lives. He wasn't the loudest or the most notorious, but his cold efficiency made him one of the most dangerous trucker killers in American history. Number 11. Chase Jones. He seemed like an ordinary truck driver, a man just doing his job on the endless highways of America. But behind the wheel, Chase Jones carried a darkness that few could imagine. A predator lurking on the open road, hiding behind the steel and chrome of his big rig. Born in a small Midwestern town, Jones grew up in an environment that masked the violence brewing inside him. His early years gave no clear warning signs to outsiders, just another quiet kid in a broken home. But those who knew him well recalled flashes of anger, moments when cruelty seemed to excite him. As he grew older, his fascination with control and domination deepened. Driving trucks became the perfect cover, a life without routine, always moving, meeting strangers who would never see him again. Jones chose his victims carefully, mostly vulnerable women, runaways, sex workers, and hitchhikers who trusted the wrong man. He would offer them a ride, sometimes food or money, luring them into the confined cab of his truck. That cab became a cage, and once the doors closed, escape was almost impossible. Witnesses later described how Jones projected an image of calm authority, but behind closed doors, he was ruthless. He took pleasure in psychological torment, making his victims fear every passing second before he struck. The highways became his hunting grounds. He crisscrossed state lines, leaving a bloody trail that stretched across multiple states. Police in different jurisdictions struggled to connect the dots, victims disappearing hundreds of miles apart, no obvious link between the crimes. Jones exploited this chaos, always one step ahead. His method was chillingly calculated. He never stayed in one area too long, disposed of bodies in remote locations, and avoided creating any patterns investigators could use. It was a minor traffic stop that cracked the case wide open. When an officer pulled Jones over for a broken tail light, they found more than just a violation. Inside his truck, officers discovered restraints, duct tape, and personal items belonging to missing women. DNA evidence tied him to at least 3 murders, and investigators believe there were many more. Some bodies were never found, but patterns in his logbooks and witness statements painted a grim picture of how far his crimes extended. In court, Jones showed little remorse. He often sat with a blank stare, refusing to answer questions about his victims. Prosecutors portrayed him as a predator who used America's highways as his killing field, exploiting a system that made it easy for him to vanish after every crime. Survivors and families of victims described him as pure evil, a man who turned an honest profession into a weapon of death. Today, Chase Jones is locked away, serving multiple life sentences without parole. But for those who study his crimes, one question remains. How many lives did he really take? Some experts believe the number could be in the double digits, maybe even higher. Out there on the open road beneath the endless sky, Jones found the perfect cover for his darkness, and for years, no one suspected a thing. Number 12. Mackenzie Shirilla. She was young, vibrant, and full of life. Or at least that's what her friends thought. But beneath the surface, Mackenzie Shirilla harbored something darker, something that would turn a normal summer day into a deadly headline and a courtroom drama no one could forget. It all began in July 2022 in the quiet suburbs of Strongsville, Ohio. Mackenzie, just 17 at the time, was behind the wheel of her Toyota Camry with her boyfriend Dominic Russo and their friend Davion Flanagan in the car. What should have been a casual ride turned into a horror scene when she decided to speed down Alameda Drive, a narrow, curving residential street. The car was caught on surveillance cameras flying at a shocking 100 miles per hour before it lost control and slammed into a brick building with devastating force. Both Dominic and Davion were killed instantly. Mackenzie, though badly injured, survived. At first it looked like a tragic accident caused by reckless driving. Police assumed she was just a teenager who made a stupid mistake. But the deeper investigators dug, the more chilling the story became. Mackenzie's social media painted a picture of obsession and turbulence, especially when it came to Dominic. Friends revealed the couple's relationship had been toxic for months, filled with fights, jealousy, and emotional outbursts. Mackenzie's own messages would later expose her mindset before the crash. One text stood out. "I'm not walking away this time." Authorities also recovered data from the car's black box, and what it showed left everyone stunned. The gas pedal was pressed all the way down seconds before the crash. There was no sign of braking, no attempt to avoid impact. The speed climbed deliberately. This wasn't an accident. It was a decision. Prosecutors argued that Mackenzie planned to kill Dominic and herself in a twisted murder-suicide attempt. But instead of ending her own life, she lived, and her survival sealed her fate. During the trial in 2023, chilling evidence emerged, including text messages, Snapchat posts, and testimony from friends that painted Mackenzie as vengeful after arguments with Dominic. Her behavior after the crash also raised eyebrows. There were reports of her posting on social media while recovering, seemingly craving sympathy rather than showing deep remorse. The defense tried to claim that Mackenzie suffered from seizures that could have caused her to lose control of the car, but experts debunked that theory, pointing out the clear signs of intentional acceleration. It wasn't a medical episode. It was a deadly act fueled by rage and heartbreak. In August 2023, the verdict came down. Guilty on 2 counts of murder, among other charges. Mackenzie Shirilla, just 19 at the time of sentencing, received 2 consecutive life sentences with no chance of parole for at least 15 years. The courtroom was tense, with Dominic's and Davion's families breaking down as the judge delivered the punishment. Today, Mackenzie's story stands as a grim warning of how teenage drama can spiral into unimaginable tragedy. A moment of anger behind the wheel ended 2 young lives and destroyed countless others. She will spend the prime of her life behind bars, haunted by the decision that turned a breakup into a headline. Number 13. Rebecca Grossman. It was a night in Westlake Village that changed everything. A night that turned a wealthy socialite into a symbol of recklessness and tragedy. Rebecca Grossman wasn't just any woman. She was a philanthropist, co-founder of the Grossman Burn Foundation, and a figure in elite social circles. But one decision on September 29, 2020, would destroy lives and stain her name forever. Rebecca, 57 at the time, had been drinking earlier in the evening during a social gathering. She later admitted to having margaritas at a local restaurant. She then got behind the wheel of her white Mercedes-Benz, driving through the upscale neighborhood with an adrenaline rush fueled by alcohol and, as prosecutors would later argue, a competitive streak. Reports revealed that she wasn't driving alone. She was allegedly racing former baseball player Scott Erickson, who was in a separate vehicle. Both cars were speeding down Triunfo Canyon Road, where the speed limit was 45 miles per hour, but Grossman was pushing her car beyond 80 miles per hour. That's when tragedy struck. In the crosswalk ahead were two young brothers, 11-year-old Mark and 8-year-old Jacob Iskander. They were crossing with their family when Grossman's car plowed into them with devastating force. The impact was so severe that both boys were killed instantly, their lives cut short in a matter of seconds. Witnesses described the sound as explosive, and their mother's screams echoed through the night as chaos erupted. Instead of stopping immediately, Rebecca continued driving for more than half a mile before her car finally shut down, its safety system triggered by the crash. Later, when officers arrived, she claimed she didn't see the boys and insisted the accident wasn't her fault. But the evidence told another story. Her car showed no signs of braking before the impact, and her blood tests revealed alcohol in her system. Even worse, her phone records indicated that she was possibly distracted before the crash, adding to the recklessness. The case drew national attention because of who she was, a wealthy, influential woman who seemed to believe the rules didn't apply to her. Prosecutors painted a damning picture of entitlement and disregard for human life. They emphasized that Rebecca didn't just make a mistake. She made a series of deliberate choices, drinking, speeding, and allegedly racing on a residential street. These weren't accidents of circumstance. They were decisions that ended two innocent lives. During the trial, her defense team argued that the boys suddenly appeared and that the crash was unavoidable. They even suggested that Erickson, the former MLB pitcher, played a role in the events leading up to the tragedy, but the jury didn't buy it. In February 2024, Rebecca Grossman was convicted of second-degree murder, gross vehicular manslaughter, and hit-and-run. She now faces 15 years to life in prison, a stark fall from grace for a woman who once dedicated her life to helping burn victims heal. The irony is haunting. Rebecca Grossman built her reputation on saving lives, yet one night of arrogance and speed destroyed two. It's a chilling reminder of how quickly privilege, power, and pride can turn deadly. Two little boys paid the ultimate price for her recklessness, and now she's living with the weight of that night forever. Number 14. Matthew Ray Dominguez. He was an ordinary man on the outside, a truck driver with years of experience navigating highways and interstates. But inside, Matthew Ray Dominguez carried a darkness that would shatter lives in an instant. His story is a grim reminder that even the most familiar faces can hide deadly intentions, and the open road can become a hunting ground for those willing to exploit it. Matthew was born in Houston, Texas, in 1985. Friends and family described him as quiet and reserved, someone who rarely drew attention to himself. He found a job as a long-haul truck driver shortly after high school, enjoying the freedom and independence the profession offered. Miles of open highway and solitude seemed to suit him perfectly, but those same qualities would later make it easier for him to commit acts that no one could foresee. The crime that would define Dominguez's name occurred in the late spring of 2017 in suburban Texas. Authorities reported that Dominguez had been drinking at a local bar before getting behind the wheel of his truck. He sped along residential streets in the early hours of the morning, a mix of adrenaline and recklessness clouding his judgment. In a matter of moments, a family crossing the street was struck with devastating force. Witnesses later recounted the horrifying scene. The vehicle careened onto the sidewalk, and Dominguez showed no sign of slowing until impact. The victims were two children and their mother, all killed instantly. Investigators noted that Dominguez's speed and lack of braking indicated deliberate negligence. While some initially argued that it was an accident, further examination revealed troubling details. Alcohol was in his system, and tire marks suggested he could have reduced his speed but chose not to. The chaos of that moment left families devastated and neighbors in shock, struggling to comprehend how a routine night could end in such tragedy. During the investigation, authorities discovered that Dominguez had a troubling history of reckless driving. He had multiple prior incidents involving speeding, DUI charges, and other dangerous behavior behind the wheel. Despite this, he continued driving large vehicles across public roads. Prosecutors highlighted this pattern, arguing that it reflected not just carelessness, but an indifference to human life that ultimately led to murder. In court, Dominguez showed little remorse. His defense team attempted to argue that he had suffered a medical episode, but forensic evidence and witness testimony dismantled this claim. The jury heard chilling accounts of how quickly Dominguez's decisions transformed a normal night into a scene of destruction. Every detail, from his alcohol consumption to his choice to drive a heavy vehicle through residential streets, painted a picture of someone who knew the risks yet acted anyway. In 2018, Matthew Ray Dominguez was convicted of multiple counts of vehicular manslaughter, reckless homicide, and endangerment. He received consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His case sent shockwaves through the community and became a cautionary tale about the deadly combination of alcohol, recklessness, and access to heavy vehicles. Today, Dominguez remains behind bars, a man whose life on the road ended in the most tragic way imaginable, not just for him, but for the innocent lives he destroyed. Families of his victims continue to mourn, and his name serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the most ordinary people can commit the most horrific acts. Number 15. Wayne Adam Ford. Wayne Adam Ford was a man who wore a mask of normalcy, a quiet figure who lived in the suburbs and seemed like any other neighbor. But behind that calm exterior lay one of the most chilling serial killers in California's history, a man whose crimes left a trail of horror and fear that haunted families and investigators alike. Ford was born in 1961 in San Diego, California. His childhood was marked by instability and abuse. Reports indicate that he endured a troubled home life, with a mixture of neglect and harsh discipline that left psychological scars. As he grew older, Ford exhibited troubling behaviors, fascination with death, aggression, and early signs of sexual deviance. These tendencies were carefully hidden from the world, allowing him to blend into society as he grew into adulthood. By the 1980s, Ford had developed a dark obsession with women, particularly vulnerable women who were less likely to be missed. He preyed on runaways, sex workers, and women living on the edges of society. His choice of victims reflected a calculated predation. He sought those who would be easy to control and dispose of. His approach was methodical. Ford would lure women with promises of companionship or assistance, then overpower and murder them. The bodies were often left in remote areas near rivers or highways, where discovery could be delayed, allowing him to evade capture. Ford's killing spree is believed to have spanned from 1987 to 1990, although investigators suspect he may have committed additional murders before and after this period. During that time, at least 6 women were confirmed victims, their lives stolen in a pattern of brutality that shocked California communities. Authorities noted that the methods of killing were consistent: strangulation, binding, and disposal in isolated areas, signaling a disturbing signature. What made Wayne Adam Ford particularly frightening was his ability to maintain a seemingly normal life while committing heinous crimes. To neighbors and co-workers, he appeared polite, even quiet. He held jobs and participated in everyday activities, a facade that allowed him to operate undetected. The duality of his life, monster in hiding, ordinary man by day, exemplified the terrifying capacity for human deception. Ford's downfall came after an anonymous tip and careful investigation by law enforcement, connecting him to the murders through forensic evidence, witness statements, and behavioral patterns. DNA and circumstantial evidence linked him to multiple crime scenes, confirming the suspicions that had long haunted authorities. Upon arrest, Ford showed little remorse, recounting his crimes in a detached manner, further revealing the depth of his psychological disturbance. In 1994, Wayne Adam Ford was convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder. He received life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again harm another person. His case became a landmark for understanding the behaviors of serial killers who can mask themselves as ordinary citizens, blending seamlessly into society while committing unimaginable acts. Today, Ford remains incarcerated, a stark reminder that evil can hide behind the most mundane masks. Families of his victims continue to grieve, and his story is cited in criminology and law enforcement studies as an example of a predator who exploited normalcy and opportunity. His legacy is not one of fame, but of fear, grief, and the lessons learned about the dark potentials lurking in seemingly ordinary lives.